Imagine every human being on Earth, all 8 billion of us, could fit into a single small town. A town you could walk across in an afternoon. That is not a thought experiment. According to a controversial 2023 study, something like this may have happened. For over 100,000 years, the ancestral human population may have collapsed to roughly 1,280 breeding individuals. If the model is right, everyone alive today descends from that tiny group. But here is the part the headlines got wrong. This near extinction was not caused by the volcano everyone blames. The real story is older, stranger, and still being argued over right now. We almost never existed. For 25 years, if you heard humanity nearly went extinct, you were told one specific story. A spectacular one. Around 74,000 years ago, on Sumatra, a volcano called Toba erupted. One of the largest eruptions in our planet's history, ejecting thousands of times more rock and ash than Mount St. Helens in 1980. In 1998, an anthropologist named Stanley Ambrose connected two facts that seemed to fit perfectly. The first was that eruption. The second was a puzzle sitting inside human DNA. When geneticists looked at modern humans, they found something strange. We are remarkably similar to one another, far less diverse than you would expect for a species spread across a planet. Two chimpanzees from neighboring troops can carry more genetic difference than two humans from opposite sides of the world. The usual explanation for low diversity is a bottleneck. At some point, the population crashed so hard that most genetic variation was lost, and everyone since descends from the handful who survived. Ambrose proposed that Toba was that moment. The eruption, he argued, triggered a volcanic winter lasting years. Skies darkened, plants died, and the human population crashed to perhaps 3,000 to 10,000 people in Africa. It was a perfect story. A single catastrophe, a near extinction, a scar written into the DNA of everyone alive. It filled textbooks and museum displays for a quarter of a century. There was only one problem. When scientists went looking for the evidence on the ground, it wasn't there. The Toba theory made a clear prediction. If the eruption had nearly wiped us out, human populations everywhere should show a sharp break right at that moment. Tools should vanish. Sites should be abandoned. So archaeologists dug at sites directly exposed to the eruption's fallout. At a place called Toba in northern India, researchers found stone tools laid down before, during, and after the ash fell. The toolkits did not disappear. They did not even change much. The people carried right on making them through the eruption. The same pattern turned up in Ethiopia. And studies of the actual climate record found that the catastrophic, years-long volcanic winter had not happened the way the models predicted. The cooling was real but modest, and East Africa seems to have been barely disturbed. By the 2020s, the position among many researchers had shifted hard. The Toba bottleneck explanation is now widely doubted. Humans lived through the largest eruption in 2 million years and kept making their tools, which left the original puzzle completely unsolved. Our DNA still carried the signature of a population crash. If Toba wasn't the cause, then what was? The answer, when it came, pointed to a moment far deeper in the past than anyone had been looking. In 2023, a team led by Wangjie Hu and Haipeng Li published a paper in Science using a new mathematical tool, the Fast Infinitesimal Time Coalescent Process, or FITCOL. The genome of a living person is a historical document, shaped by every expansion and collapse our ancestors passed through. A severe crash leaves a mathematical fingerprint. Read it precisely enough, and you may reconstruct population sizes from before our species existed. The team ran more than 3,000 living genomes through the model. The result was staggering. Between 930,000 and 813,000 years ago, the model suggests the ancestral human population collapsed to around 1,280 breeding individuals. At the start of that crash, the model suggests nearly 99% of the ancestral population vanished, and the survivors did not bounce back. The bottleneck held for around 117,000 years, longer than our own species has existed. For that entire span, the ancestors of all humanity numbered about the population of a large village. Sit with the timescale, because it makes this so different from the Toba story. This was not 74,000 years ago. This was over 900,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens existed at all. The people caught in this bottleneck were not us. They were an earlier human species, living in the transition between the early and middle Pleistocene. They would give rise to three lineages: the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and, hundreds of thousands of years later, us. Which means this near extinction sits at the base of all three. If that population of roughly 1,300 had failed, there would have been no Neanderthals, no Denisovans, and no human beings. The entire branch would have ended in a dry valley almost 1,000,000 years ago, and the planet would have carried on without ever knowing what it had lost. And there is a haunting piece of corroboration. Paleontologists have long puzzled over a gap in the fossil record. Between roughly 950,000 and 650,000 years ago, human fossils in Africa and Eurasia become oddly scarce. A population crushed to a few hundred individuals would leave almost nothing behind to fossilize. The gap in the bones and the crash in the DNA may be the same event, seen through two windows. As for what caused it, the honest answer is that we are not certain, but the timing points a finger. The bottleneck falls precisely at the early to middle Pleistocene transition, when the planet's climate rhythm changed. The shorter cycles of ice and warmth gave way to longer, harsher swings. Glaciations stretched out, ocean temperatures dropped. Across Africa and Eurasia, there is evidence of prolonged, brutal droughts. For a small, scattered population, with no agriculture and no stored food, a long enough drought does not need to kill everyone directly. It only needs to make survival hard enough, for long enough, that the numbers grind downward, generation by generation, until the species is balanced on a knife's edge for 100,000 years. But if the crash was so severe, how did they climb back out? One possibility is that the recovery coincided with the human chromosome 2 fusion, the event behind our distinctive chromosome count. The fusion is real. A link to this bottleneck is speculative. The safer conclusion is simpler. Whatever happened, the pressure reshaped the population that survived. The thing that nearly destroyed them may have forged them. Here is where an honest account has to slow down, because this is not settled science, and you should be suspicious of anyone who says it is. The 2023 study is bold, and boldness invites scrutiny. Since it was published, other researchers have pushed back hard. The sharpest objection is this: the bottleneck signal shows up strongly in African populations, but is weak or absent outside Africa. And that is counterintuitive, because everyone outside Africa also descends from African ancestors who lived long after this crash. If the whole ancestral line was squeezed 900,000 years ago, that squeeze should be visible in everyone alive today, not just some of us. Some scientists argue the Fit-Cole method may be detecting a statistical artifact, a ghost in the mathematics, rather than a real event. Attempts to reproduce the severe bottleneck with other methods have not always succeeded. The debate is live and unresolved. This does not mean the crash is fiction. The original authors have answered the criticism, and the gap in the fossil record still needs explaining. We are watching a genuine scientific argument unfold in real time over a question about our origins that could not be more fundamental. Did our ancestors truly stand at the edge of oblivion? The DNA of 3,000 living people says, maybe. The answer is not yet written, and that uncertainty is the story. The answer is not yet written. What is not in doubt is the deeper truth underneath it. At some point, perhaps several, the human story narrowed to a fragile handful of survivors. Every language, every city, every person you have loved descends from that thread when it was at its thinnest. We imagine our species as inevitable, the triumphant endpoint of evolution. The DNA tells a humbler story. We are the descendants of the ones who barely made it. We were never inevitable. We were lucky. And that you exist at all is the least likely part of the story. Subscribe if you want to keep following the questions that don't have clean answers. See you in the dark.